Hey guys, it's Halsey Schider with the Helicopter Podcast. Here I am, like asking my poor guest questions as it's counting down from 5. So Travis, I apologize for that. We're so excited. My good buddy Adam Huff, who's a pilot at Halo Flight, and you may be familiar with his name because I did a podcast with him earlier this year. Reached out and said, "Halsey, you got to talk to the new CEO of Halo Flight. His name is Travis Patterson, and he has an extensive military career, including time at Marine One, which is the presidential helicopter. So just completely honored to be talking to someone like Travis. Before we get into it, of course, special thanks to Vertical Helicast for making this podcast possible. If you haven't checked out Vertical Helicast yet, it's put on by MHM, the same folks that do Vertical Magazine, Skies Magazine, pretty much like the aviation juggernauts for, content and things like that. So the Helicopter Podcast, myself, we're so blessed and honored to be part of Vertical Helicast. And of course, special thanks to Bell Helicopters, which Halo Flight operates. I know the 407, the 429.
Yep.
So thank you to Bell Helicopters as well for making the podcast possible. Mr. Patterson, welcome to the Helicopter Podcast. How are you?
Good. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
I'm happy to have you here. I think this is going to be a really fun conversation. You have quite the resume. As I was telling you before we recorded, you don't look quite old enough for the extensive resume. When did you start your career in the military?
I enlisted when I was 17. So fresh out of high school, I went to boot camp. Then, started from there. So in 1994,
that's insane. And is that something that you always knew that you wanted to do, or is it a family thing? What kind of drew you towards the military?
A little bit of both. I always wanted to be a pilot. That's one of those kids who was very lucky to know what he wanted to do when he was a kid. And my father was in the Marine Corps, and when I was in high school, he told me, "Hey, Travis, if you're really interested in being a pilot in the Marine Corps, why don't you go talk to a recruiter?" He's like, "Whatever you do, don't sign anything." I said, "Okay, Dad." And I went down and talked to the recruiter. I came home. I was like, "Dad, you got to call Mom. You have to go sign some paperwork because I go to boot camp in June." So that's how I started.
Whoops.
Didn't really think it through too much. I never really intended to stay for 29 years. It just kind of worked out that way.
It seems like it worked out for sure. Before we get too far into the career, you're at Halo Flight now. I'm so excited to talk about Halo. I lived in Texas for about 10 years, just moved back to Oregon, which is my, home state. But I love Texas. I miss Texas. So I'm very familiar. I flew air medical in Texas, not for Halo, but for air evac. But here are the guys flying. I've had buddies, including Adam at Halo, and a nonprofit organization that does wonderful things for Texas, specifically South Texas, but I think kind of all over, of course. So I'm excited to talk about that. Are you live in Corpus now then?
I do. Yeah, I do.
Are you a Texas native?
Yep. I grew up in Houston. Both my wife and I grew up in Houston. Then we, my last set of orders was to Naval Air Station Corpus Christi.
Yep, I saw that.
To be a flight instructor here. And then,
flying stuck wing, right? It was T6.
I did both T6 and T44. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm curious to talk about that too. So much to talk about, Travis. This is going to be crazy.
Absolutely. Yeah,
now, before we get into helicopters, you live in Corpus Christi. It's one of my favorite places because I love kiteboarding. So please tell me that you kiteboard.
I have not done it yet. No, but I intend to one of these days.
You need to. Yeah. So Oso Bay, if you're familiar with where that's
it's
at.
10 minutes away from my house. Yeah.
I was driving 6 hours round trip twice a week.
Oh yeah, it's 10 minutes from the house, right by A&M Corpus, right?
Yep, exactly. Yeah. And I did hear that maybe there's some issues there now, like they're not supposed to use that area because it's part of like the church for their launch and what. I don't know if that got fixed.
I don't know.
But Oso Bay to me was like the coolest spot. It's like 2 to 3 feet deep, pretty much
Yeah,
as
it's
far
very
out as
shallow.
you can
Yeah,
go.
yeah,
And that's nice for kiteboarding because if you're trying new skills and you fall, it's just you can stand up
yeah.
and
You'll be
grab
okay.
your board. Up here in Oregon in the Columbia River, you fall, you lose your board. The current's pulling it one way and the wind's taking you the other
Taking you
way.
the other.
So you have
Yeah,
to kind of maneuver yourself,
sure.
and it gets a little more stressful. I did have a stingray encounter in Corpus at
Oh yeah,
OSO.
they're out there.
So
Yeah.
I got a bit of a tattoo from that on my left thigh, little battle wound per se. But
Mm.
I'm just, yeah, you have to next spring, next summer. There's a ton of places out there that
Yeah.
teach.
Yeah.
Do it. It's like do this 10 hours worth of lessons because you're going to take every bit of it. But honestly, like for me, kiteboarding it's very much like being a pilot.
Mm.
It's about understanding the capabilities of not just yourself, but the equipment that you have.
Yeah. That's
And
important.
so I think pilots make really good kiteboarders. Not that
Well,
I'm really
I'll have to
good,
try it. Yeah.
but I think you kind of get the sense of the aerodynamics
Sure.
and you understand the risk, right? And being able to mitigate the risk and using your training
Right.
to help you mitigate that. So to me, it's
Yeah.
kind of like yin yang with being a pilot. So
Yeah.
I digress. Sorry, you
No,
got a
not a
kiteboard.
problem.
Let me
Yeah.
know when you do, and I'll
I
come
will.
down and be your kiteboarding buddy.
Okay.
And a lot of good guys down there in Corpus. Um, so you start 17. Your dad says, "Hey, don't sign the papers." Oops,
Yeah.
sign the papers.
Oops. Yeah.
It happens.
It
What
worked
what
out.
was
Yeah.
so you started enlisted.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, correct me if I'm wrong, but that beginning route obviously would not put you as a pilot in
No,
in the Marine Corps.
no. What I did was I enlisted in the reserve. So basically, you could directly enlist into the Marine Corps Reserve, and that's what I did. So I went to boot camp, I went to my MOS school, and then I came home and I went to college. And while I was at school, 1 week in a month, 2 weeks every summer was my reserve duty. And then my intention was to graduate from A&M and get a commission in the Marine Corps and go to flight school. So that's
Very
kind of
smart,
how it
and that's
worked
what you
out.
did.
Yeah. Yep. That's
So
exactly what I did.
you
Yeah.
did your undergrad at A&M, correct?
I did. Yep.
Okay,
Yeah.
not gonna hold it against you, Travis, but
It's a family tradition. My dad did too.
gig
Yeah.
'em.
Yeah.
I'm an Oregon Duck, and
Okay.
I think Aggies and Ducks are kind of similar in the sense that like we love ourselves a lot,
We're very
but then
proud of
people
ourselves.
outside, yeah, there's a
They
lot of
just don't get
pride,
it.
which I think
Yeah.
is fine.
That's
But then from
important.
the outside, people are like, oh, ugh. But
Yeah. Yeah.
I have a lot of good buddies. Obviously, living in Texas for a while that were Aggies, and
Yeah.
I never made it to College Station for a game, but
It's definitely worth it if you get the chance.
I think it
It's
would
quite an
be a
experience.
total
Yeah.
riot for sure.
Yeah.
So you go to college, you get your degree, political
Mhm.
science, if I recall,
Yep.
and your whole intention of that is, hey, look, I'm going to get my college degree, and then I'm going to commission into the Marine Corps.
Yeah. That was kind of the plan all along. And you don't need an aerospace engineering degree to go to flight school. In the Marine Corps specifically at the time, you just needed a college degree. And there was a period of time before that where if you didn't have an engineering degree and very good grades, you weren't even going to get a chance. But then needs of the Marine Corps shift back and forth, and all of a sudden they needed a whole bunch more pilots, and that was it. I took I think they called it the Aviation Aptitude Battery, ASTB or something like that.
Yeah,
I took it, I passed
ASVAB.
it. Yeah, ASVAB. I took it, I passed it, and I got my flight contract, and that was it.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I actually did the ROTC program for a year in college.
Okay.
My 1 year of college, I'm a scholar,
Yeah.
and I took the ASVAB, and I actually was given the opportunity for a scholarship at the school, but it was through a ground contract, or something along those lines. It's been about 15 years, and so I kind of was like, man, I really want to be a pilot. I don't know if
Yeah.
I want to, what to do, and so I ended up kind of going the civilian route, and kind of stumbled into helicopters accidentally. But it is
Mhm.
kind of like this regret that I have because it's like, man, what if I would have stuck it out? Maybe I could have got into flight. I had
Sure.
buddies on Facebook that I went to college with, and they're flying F-18s. Some of them are not.
Yeah.
Most of them are not, but some are.
Yeah.
And so I definitely think about that. So For our listeners out there, because we have a younger listening audience,
Mm-hmm.
kind of getting into deciding what routes they want to go. And not that you're a recruiter, obviously, but so
Sure.
sorry to put you on the spot. But
No, it's okay.
what are some of the ways that young men and women can think about skinning the cat of joining the military and using that as their path into aviation? Because it's a great path, great training. You get to fly
Yeah,
the most amazing
fantastic
aircraft.
training, best aircraft. Obviously, it's if you're trying to do it on your own in the civilian market, it's very expensive. And if you come to, I'll speak specifically to the Navy and the Marine Corps because that's what I know. You can go into the Marine Corps on a flight contract. So if you're a college student, you have to be a college graduate to be an officer in the Navy or Marine Corps. You can go into those services on a flight contract. It's been a while since I went through the process, obviously, but at the time when I did it, I went to an recruiting officer, and said, "Hey, I want to go to flight school. What do I need to do?" Um, and you take a couple of tests, take a flight physical, you take that your aviation aptitude test. Then you go to officer candidate school in the Marine Corps in Quantico, Virginia. At the time was 10 weeks. I think it's still the same, or there's other ways you can do it, 2 6-week sessions over 2 summers, however it works. And then if you go into the Marine Corps as an officer, you have three options. One is ground, the other is air, and the other one is law. So if you go in with a air contract, when you finish the basic school, you go to Pensacola for flight school. That's the way I did it. The Navy's a little bit different. If you come out of a service academy, the Annapolis, the Naval Academy, that's another route. You can get an air contract in the Navy or Marine Corps out of Annapolis as well.
Yeah, there's definitely ways to do it. I've always
Mm-hmm.
kind of thought, I think the way, if I could rewind time and I could do it again, I would maybe consider going to like a business school. For me
Yeah,
personally, because I'm interested in business. But if you're interested in marketing or whatever, go, figure out what you want to
do
study and
that.
study it.
Yeah.
And maybe Donnie, you could be a part of the ROTC program.
Mm-hmm.
It's a good way to kind of get used to the structure and lifestyle of the military and kind of how that flow
Yeah.
works. Or you don't have to. You can.
Yeah.
I think if
That's
you
the
did
advantage of ROTC in some schools. You do it for 4 years, you decide it's not for you, then that's it.
that's true. Yeah, and
Yeah.
I think the way that ROTC did it at Embry-Riddle, where I went for my 1 year, was you do your junior year, or between your sophomore and junior year, you do 6 weeks at OCS. I think they called it like junior, like
Mm-hmm.
OCS. And then between your senior year. So actually, as a senior, you start your year as a commissioned officer because you finish your second stint at
Yeah.
OES. Am I saying it right?
We call it OCS, Officer
Yeah,
Candidate
OCS.
School.
Yeah,
Yeah.
duh. OES is a school up here in Oregon
Okay.
that, yeah, it's like a private school that's really good at lacrosse. Anyway,
Oh, yeah.
so different routes to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And again, the military, superior equipment, you're flying the coolest stuff.
Yeah.
Really good training, very regimented, very different than, say, what I experienced
Yeah. It's very,
going to
very regimented,
civilian.
very specific. Yeah.
What was that like for you as a young person going into that type of flight school environment? Because I'm to understand it's a bit of a pressure cooker
It
going the
is.
military route.
Yeah. I mean, if you consider once you finish the initial Marine Corps entry training and then you get to flight school, you have a period of about 6 weeks of a ground school where you do rudimentary aerodynamics, some water survival, um, engines and things like that, just a general aviation overview. And then you go to primary flight training. Primary flight training, when I went through, was a T-34. Now it's a T-6. And it's challenging. It's everything you do is graded. Every ground school course, every test, every flight you do is graded, and you're compared and rated against your peers. It's a competitive process, and it's challenging. I mean, it's challenging, but it's also a lot of fun. I was fortunate to spend my last 3 years here in Corpus as a primary flight instructor to a certain degree. And I got to, see it firsthand from the other side. I did it as a student 20 plus years ago and got to come back and do it as an instructor for my last three. But I will say it's very challenging, but it's also a lot of fun. I mean, I used to tell students when they checked in, like, this is going to be hard. It's harder than college. It's probably harder than anything you've ever done, But if you put the effort in, you will see the payback. It's one of those things where if you work hard, you see the return. Um, and I mean, the T6 is like a little rocket ship. I mean, it cruises around at 240 knots, 7.5 Gs, ejection seats and glass cockpits, the whole thing. It is a fun aircraft to fly. And once you kind of get the hang of it, it really is. And I mean, that's the best advice I could give. It's really hard, but it's also really rewarding.
Yeah, I mean, most things that are worth it, right, come
Yeah,
with the
exactly.
challenge.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
if you put your head down and work hard at it, you should hopefully be able to be successful.
Yeah,
Obviously things can happen with a medical, both on the military side, civilian
sure.
side. And yeah, you may start school and see that maybe aviation learning is not for you. It's not a thing that
Yeah,
maybe
I mean, I know folks that
you're
went to
good
college
at.
and said, I have to be an aerospace engineer if I want to go to flight school. And many of them ended up with political science degrees and went to flight school anyway. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, it's the flying that's the fun part.
Yeah, as a pilot, you're kind of like, I'm sure it helps to have like an aeronautical engineering degree, I guess, right?
Yeah,
I mean, that's a very high level of knowledge, but as a pilot, you don't really need to know that kind of
yeah, you're
stuff,
not
right?
building the airplane or designing it. You're
No,
just flying it. Yeah,
you're just like,
yeah,
when I fly a helicopter, I'm like, who are the smart dudes that made this thing?
yeah.
Like how
Because I
does
still don't. I've
this,
been doing it for 20 years, and I'm not sure
like,
exactly how it works.
how does this work? Yeah, no, it's crazy. And actually, there's so many things coming out right now in helicopters and new simulations. This past,
Hmm.
this episode will release on a little bit of a different time. So wasn't this past week, but previously I've had, we just had Robinson helicopters on, and
Oh yeah.
they've done all this simulation recently, and they found out that low G mass bumping, and
Hmm.
more specifically the roll that's created that we all kind of were taught is the tail rotor. It's not the tail rotor. It's actually the design of their horizontal stabilizer.
Hmm.
Now, in an aircraft like what you flew in the Cobra or a Huey
Yeah.
with a higher mounted tail rotor, then that actually is causing that rolling moment. But
Hmm.
just like these crazy new, simulations coming out that these smart people are being able to kind of use this new technology to make our industry
Yeah.
safer,
Yeah. It's
which
great.
is pretty cool. So yeah, if you haven't listened to the podcast that I did some time ago with Dave over at Robinson, he's the VP of operations, former Bell guy. We talk all about the new design, and it's pretty cool. And the simulation involves, again, a little bit over my head sometimes.
Yeah.
These
Yeah. Very smart
as a,
people doing very
you
smart
know,
things. Yeah.
I think the common misconception is like when I tell people I'm a pilot, they're like, "Oh, you must be real good at physics and math," and
Nope.
I'm like,
Not particularly. Yeah. Yeah.
"Not really, actually." Like, I was like the senior in the sophomore level math class.
Hmm. Yeah.
It's you have to have a basic knowledge and understanding of a lot
Right.
of things, but you're really not an expert. So you finish your flight school.
Mhm.
From flight school, is that where you get put into the unit that's flying the Cobra?
Yeah. So the way it works, and it still does today, you go to primary flight training. And for the Marine Corps at the time, when you finished, you had three options. One was jets, one was C-130s, and the other one was helicopters. And full disclosure, when I went to flight school, I wanted to be an F-18 pilot. That's what I wanted. The best thing
Of
that never
course.
happened to me, if I could go back and pick, I would pick to do exactly what I did. I wouldn't change a thing. So I got helicopters, and then from there you go to Pensacola, Florida, you go through we call HT's helicopter training school. It took me about 8 months to get through it, and get your wings, and then you select for the Marine Corps. Then it was Cobras, Hueys, 53s, and 46s. Those were the four options. I wanted Cobras. I was lucky in that I don't remember how many of us there were. There were like 12 of us that winged my week. I was number two. The guy in front of me wanted Cobras, but he wanted to go to the East Coast. I wanted Cobras, and I wanted to go to the West Coast. So he was the number one guy. He got Cobras East, and I was number two. I got Cobras West. And then, yeah, I went to the called at the time the FRS, the Fleet Replacement Squadron, where you learn how to fly a Cobra.
Man,
Yeah,
I for our listeners out there, I think everyone, even non-aviation people, know what a Cobra is.
I think so. Yeah, they may get it
But
confused with an Apache every now and then,
they
but
they
yeah,
they get it
yeah.
confused with the Apache. I've seen a Cobra up close a few times. One thing that's striking to me is just the width of the rotor
Yeah.
blades.
Yeah, it's about 48 feet tip path plane. 48, if I remember correctly, the whiskey was about 48 feet.
Yeah, just crazy. And it looks like the rotor blade itself looks like the same size as like a Cessna
It
152
is,
wing
yeah. It's
almost.
about 24 and a half feet, one rotor blade. And
God,
if I remember correctly, it's 2 feet 9 inches in width. It's
it's
big.
it's very big.
And you can hear it too, that wop 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 noise. That's what makes that. Yeah.
So kind of from like a higher level of understanding the Cobra, what are some cool things about the Cobra that probably someone like myself doesn't really even know about the Cobra?
Yeah, it's very reliable, very durable. Could take a beating. Uh, it had some pretty good munitions on it. Unguided rockets and 20 millimeter. Also could carry laser guided missiles, the Hellfire, and wire guided missiles, the TOW. You also put an air to air missile on it. You can carry a Sidewinder. It was very, very reliable. Like I said, very, very good for the Iraq and Afghanistan conflict. Low altitude, get dirty. It could do all those things pretty well, and could take a beating.
So as like an attack helicopter, that primary mission is
Mhm.
like and kind of supporting ground
Yeah,
troops
a lot of
kind of
close air
thing.
support, convoy escort. Kazovac escort. That was the primary role in those specific conflicts anyway. Yeah, and low altitude. The tactics would vary from year to year. Occasionally, eventually we got much better survivability equipment on it, and we would start to fly at higher altitudes with the theory that we would, if someone shot a heat-seeking missile at it, you would allow the system the opportunity to work. Whereas if you were down low, your chances of getting hit by small arms fire were a lot greater. So you stay high, you stay out of that, and you let the system work in the event that something else gets shot at you. That was kind
Yeah,
of the
it's
idea.
wild. That's I want the system to work for me for sure.
Yeah, yeah. Give it the
I,
opportunity. Yeah.
I would give myself a little altitude. Hey, Travis, we're just going to take a quick break for
Sure.
a brief sponsor call.
Bell is proud to sponsor Vertical Helicasts and their vision to hold meaningful mission, safety, and best practice conversations in the helicopter industry. The lessons learned from these conversations will undoubtedly shape the future of both new and veteran helicopter operators.
Yeah, I mean, that's, from a civilian background, this idea of, flying a helicopter in combat, flying it combat maneuvers, things like that. I mean, it's a completely different ball of wax.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the flying that you train for, right? It's kind of just a different style of flying. And I'm curious now, and I always ask my military friends and colleagues this question: as you transfer into this civilian world, I know that you've now transferred into the executive role as the chief executive
Mm-hmm.
officer at Halo. So I don't actually know how much flying you're doing, but
Not
have
as
you
much
had
as I'd
an
like.
yeah, have you had an opportunity to do some post-military civilian flying, and what has that kind of been like for you, um,
Yeah.
transitioning out of the military? Because I know that can be challenging.
I've done some. When I first started here, I went to the Bell Training Academy to go through the 407 course. And then I still have to complete Halo specific training, which has been challenging just based on my schedule, and our director of operations and chief pilot's schedule, because they still have to fly the line. And I am me compared to our line pilots, my training is not the priority, right? So they're the ones flying the line every day. I am more of an administrative role, but my intention is to get it completed, so I can, in the event that someone is sick, or I can fill holes here and there, because our pilots are paid by the hour, and I can't. If I take their shift, I'm taking somebody's paycheck. So, um, but the civilian flying is different. Um, I've done a little periodically throughout the year, just on my spare time, like flying Cessna 152s or 172s, things like that. But it's very different. Here, it's a little more similar because it's mission oriented, right? You have a mission, and your mission is, you know, helicopter EMS, as opposed to just learning how to fly a Cessna or something like a civilian flight school.
Sure. Yeah, it's always interesting, for our listeners out there that are maybe finishing up a military career in flying.
Mm-hmm.
I've been fortunate enough to have a lot of colleagues that kind of had that route. specifically going into air medical. That seems to be like a very popular path.
Yeah.
I think because of the kind of the mission orientation,
Yeah.
or
It appeals to a lot
more
of people.
focused on, actually going out and accomplishing something. And obviously you can do that in utility and other
Yeah.
avenues, right? Like a mission's a mission, but the air medical mission, specifically what Halo is doing as a nonprofit,
Yeah.
and providing critical care access to rural communities, is pretty.
Yeah. It's a
It's a
great
pretty
mission. It really is.
admirable thing to do, and flying obviously nice equipment, the GXI, the 429. So you get to fly some super cool things at Halo. What is your kind of, you're brought in military career, obviously very extensive. And again, I'm excited to talk more about that. But as we talk about Halo here for a little bit, kind of what has been your objectives coming into this role for Halo?
Well, the number one thing that I always, whenever the employees or the pilots and I are all together, the one thing I always harp on is safety, 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 safety. I mean, it's an inherently dangerous business. There is risk associated with it. There is no way to get rid of all the risk. You just have to mitigate it as best you can. So risk mitigation, safe operations, those things are always the number one priority. The way I kind of put it is the safety of our crew, our patients, and our aircraft. Every decision you make has to take those things into account first. Like, crew, patient, aircraft. That those are always the number one priority.
Sure.
We're very fortunate here at Halo. We've had a very long, very good safety and operational record. So those things, your number one priority has to be able to keep those. My thought process at Halo over the last 6 months since I've started has been, okay, we're doing pretty good now, but you need to look at the organization as where do you want to be in 5 years and where do you want to be in 10 years? Are we going to be flying the same aircraft 5 years from now? Probably. In 10 years? I don't know. My biggest concern is as we move forward 5 years from now, what I don't want to have happen is all of a sudden we have to replace aircraft or move on to some new model and we don't have a plan for it. So that's one, kind of always making sure. Being a nonprofit has its advantages, it has its challenges too, but one of the advantages is you can kind of fundraise and focus your efforts in specific areas. And my priority is to provide to our community the best trained pilots, the best trained mechanics, the best trained clinical staff operating the most professionally maintained aircraft. And those are the things that keep you safe and keep you operationally successful. So that's kind of my focus.
And from your perspective, and I'm sure obviously your director of operations, chief pilot, are probably kind of more responsible for the interview process and bringing on pilots, but I'm sure there's some marching orders coming from the top of, expectations and things like that.
Sure.
For the guys and gals that are listening to this podcast right now that are hitting that time requirement to start looking at air medical and being able to be, land their first air medical job, what is Halo looking for in a pilot?
So we've got our basic minimums, 2,500 hours, things like that. We have those minimums, but we also we're a very small company. There's only 51 of us, 13 pilots. Everybody knows everybody else real well. There's a real kind of team family atmosphere here. One of the intangibles I think we look for is somebody who can work really well with the crew. I still have yet to do it. I haven't actually flown a mission yet, but you're working with a medical crew that knows a little bit about aviation, but they're in the aircraft with you. They have just as much a say as the pilot in command does as to the safety and operation of the aircraft. So that's something we look for. Like you have to be a real team player. You have to want to do the job. I don't want someone to just show up when they're on shift for their 7-hour or their 12-hour shift and they get a call. Like that's not an interruption, right? That's your job. That's why you're here. Those are the things that we look for. The kind of can you work really well with other people? Can you work really well with the medical crew? And do you understand the importance of what we do here? And do you really want to do it? Because we've had one or two folks that have come in and interviewed and looked around and they decided it wasn't for them. You have to really want to do a job like this, especially this day and age when, we're not directly competing, but we are kind of competing with the airlines for pilots. Even helicopter guys are going airlines. So it's challenging.
Yeah, that's a whole other ball of wax at the
Yeah.
rotor wing transition. I have thoughts on it. I actually applied. I got hired at Envoy back in the day,
Did you?
and I thought that
Yeah.
was going to be my route. And ultimately, COVID happened, and I was selling helicopters on the side, and said, I'm just going to try to sell helicopters full time and see if
Yeah.
that works, and be an airline pilot as my fallback.
As your backup.
And luckily, selling helicopters has been an effective way for me to provide
Good.
thus far. So I've, I feel like I dodged the bullet a little bit. I don't think the
Yeah.
grass is necessarily greener
It
on the
isn't.
fixed wing side. I would say that the competition of the airlines, I think, has been good for pilot pay across the board.
Yeah. Pilot pay, pilot quality of life, all of those things.
Yeah. And I think
I
that's
can't
important
pay what the airlines pay, but I can compete in other ways.
Certainly. And, I've seen a lot of air medical companies change benefit packages and, quality of life and schedule.
Yeah.
There's something to be said, about, I don't know, is Halo a traditional kind of 7 on, 7 off, 14 on, 14 off?
We do 7 on, 7 off. Traditionally, we have guys that are, live farther away and maybe want to do a 14-14, which we can work with. But the standard is 7/7s or 7 on, 7 off. Yeah.
I mean, it's hard to beat a full-time salary and working half the year.
Yeah.
I always had that appeal. Air medical for me, I did it for a couple of years. The challenging part for me was the nights. And being able to, some guys and gals choose to kind of switch their entire schedule, their sleep schedule, and that's probably the most effective way. But for me, it didn't work. It just because I was getting like almost like this jet lag effect at the end of my hitch, at the beginning and at the end. And it was kind of just like, you know what? I'm just going to keep a normal schedule. And
it's hard to live your life on the backside of the clock.
Get woken up. So that was certainly a challenge, and I definitely tell everyone that's looking into air medical, think about that. Think about how your body reacts and things like that. Because that's definitely kind of one, that was hard for me. I think it's hard for a lot of people.
It is. Your body's not designed to do that.
Yeah, but at that same token, you're doing some pretty cool operations, right? Like, I was flying, nice helicopters, well equipped, night vision goggles. I was doing a lot of things that a lot of civilian pilots don't ever get to experience.
Don't ever get the chance to do. Sure.
Landing on I-35 or 37.
Yeah, landing in somebody's field somewhere. Or,
and that kind of thing. It's pretty incredible. So, just like any job, there's pros, there's cons. And I think if you're thinking about flying air medical, kind of weighing that out and also picking the organization that you want to be a part of. Halo is 51 people. Some of the other
we're like a family. Everybody knows
some of the other larger operations, we're talking about thousands of people
spread out all over multiple states. Yeah.
And, I worked for a conglomerate. It was AMGH, and then it turned into GMR when I was leaving. And I was lucky. I had great management, and I never really felt like I was encompassed in this big machine. I don't know how it's been since GMR took over, but I think that there's something probably special about going to somewhere like Halo, where it's a little bit of not a little bit, it's a lot smaller. And like you said, it's probably more of a family atmosphere.
It definitely is.
At Air Methods or at GMR, I'm sure you don't have access to the CEO like you might have there at Halo Flight. Which is pretty cool, actually. So I like that. Obviously, the nonprofit aspect. I could go on about air medical and thoughts on that. I won't, but I think it's important. I think it serves a critical thing for these communities.
Yeah, that it may not be profitable for larger corporations to operate in some of the areas that we do. Not that we're not covering operational costs. It's just, it is a concern, but it's not our chief concern.
It's different. It's, you guys approach it differently. And I think I know friends that would only go and fly for an organization like Halo that's not for profit. There's other organizations around the United States. And so, I think it's a really cool mission. Not to mention, you guys are flying some amazing equipment.
Yeah, we do have some
if
great
I'm
aircraft.
correct, it's GXI, which is the latest greatest,
Yeah.
407, and then also the 429. Am I missing anything?
No, we have three GXIs, a 429. Then we do have a legacy 407 that we fly as well. But our
Yeah, I love it.
primary fleet consists of GXIs. Yeah,
Yeah, I haven't been fortunate enough to be in the GXI yet, but
it's a great
everything that I've been
aircraft.
told, the capabilities, the redundancies of the
Hmm.
systems. Are you guys flying
Yeah,
IFR in the GXI?
we are. Right now, of our 13 pilots, only two of them are full up around IFR. But our goal is by this time next year to have all of our pilots fully IFR. I mean, they all have instrument ratings, obviously, um, but they're not complete with our internal training yet. And the goal is by this time next year to have everyone up and doing IFR.
Yeah, I mean that's incredible. If you can go to a program and fly IFR or have the
Yeah,
opportunity,
yeah.
if that's something that you want to do, that's something you
Yeah,
should
and
consider.
I mean, it's, in my opinion, IFR, we're not doing IFR scene flights, obviously, but if we're doing patient transfers, we should be doing it IFR either way, if you can, because it's just safer. You get traffic avoidance, you get there. If you're not familiar with South Texas, you are a little. From here, if we fly down to the valley, south of Corpus Christi to the valley, there is nothing. There is no weather reporting. I mean, it's just a bunch of empty space. And so you could leave Corpus, the weather's great, heading for Harlingen, the weather's great. You get to Baffin Bay and you got to turn around. That's what we're trying to eliminate with our IFR program.
Yeah, no, it's smart, and that's it's nice to have that tool in the cockpit,
Yeah,
knowing that you can,
knowing you
for
can if you
us,
need to.
I was in a VFR program, but we had, a two-axis autopilot, partial
Hmm.
glass cockpit. And it was nice knowing because, you're right, South Texas weather can change really quickly.
Yeah, yeah,
And I think air medical pilots get pretty good at knowing their region, and
yeah.
understanding.
What
For
the weather
me,
patterns are like, and yeah,
absolutely. Like for me, I could get a call at 1 in the morning and look at the spread. Okay, it's clear right now, but man, we're 3 degrees. I know the second that dew point temperature hit, it's just
yeah,
going
it's
to fog
fog.
up. It's
Yeah,
just like, and so you might have to decline a flight when it's 10
when it
miles and
looks,
clear.
yeah, yeah. It's just you
That's
get to know
hard to
your
do.
area. Yeah,
Um, but air medical companies, and I'm sure Halo is following suit, are really supporting pilots now,
you have to,
in
right?
making
You
those
can't
decisions.
force someone to make a decision that I think, like I'm not there. There, that you have to, um, be supportive of your pilot's decisions. Yeah,
Yeah, I
and
mean,
give them
I think
the
it's
give them
crucial.
the support to make them. Right, you got to let them. Tell them what the limits are and let them make the right decision.
Yeah, absolutely. That's why you hire them. You hire them to
Yeah,
make those decisions.
yeah.
I think that there's been three changes in air medical. I can't speak for them because I wasn't flying air medical, 20 plus years ago. But
Hmm.
I guess my outside interpretation is one of the things that you said resonated with me is the crew. I think
Yeah,
back in the day there used to be kind of this concept of, I think the term was self-loading baggage,
yeah,
um, and this mentality that they had no say in the safe operation of the flight.
yeah,
When in fact, actually, if you include them in as much as you can as a pilot,
yeah,
they can actually save your bacon. I've had crew members say, "Hey, I think I see a power line," that I didn't see.
yeah,
Hey, do you see that tower that's unlit that we're seeming to be on
yeah.
course
Absolutely.
with? True
Yeah,
story. That's
our those things
that's
are
being a
important. I mean,
team
our
player,
DO
right?
says he says it to me regularly. He says it's three to go and one to say no. I
Yep.
mean, you have to do it as a crew because if you don't,
Yeah.
you're not going to keep your crews.
And I think as a pilot, the best thing that you can do, at least what I tried to do, was make them know that, hey, you guys are a part of this helicopter crew.
Yeah,
We're
yeah,
in this together. The 51%, three to go, one not to go. For me as a pilot, I kind of look at it like I shouldn't get 51% because we should be
yeah.
having the conversation.
Everybody should be all in. Yeah,
We should, there should be no doubt, right?
right.
And so, I think incorporating that's been a big change. I know a lot of air medical companies are pushing towards this crew resource management and working together, and I think that's a
Hmm.
big positive change.
Oh yeah. I'm new to it, but we do it here, and you couldn't do it any other way.
Yeah,
So,
I think it's a big one. And then the other two is technology. The
mhm.
technology for these aircraft have become incredible,
Yeah.
specifically in the GXI and specifically in the 429. I mean, you guys are
Hmm.
flying amazingly equipped aircraft
Yeah.
uh, with so much capability, so much redundancy, uh, which, 20 years, 30 years ago, they're flying air medical missions with a 420 GPS. It's
Yeah.
like,
Our first aircraft at Halo was a 206. Like, so
yeah, it's
at
just
least
like,
one.
it's just things change, right? So
Yeah.
technology, and then third is pilot support and supporting
Hmm.
pilots and allowing them to make good pilot decisions,
Yeah. You got to.
and not questioning. I think those are the top three things that we've seen within the industry that have made helicopter air ambulance, traditionally a long time ago, was very, very scary, and very
Hmm.
dangerous. And it's just not the case anymore. It's
No.
getting so much better, and it's such a pleasant industry to be a part of.
Yeah.
And so,
Yeah. It is. Yeah.
I hope that our listeners out there that are thinking about air medical, like I said, for me, the nights were challenging, and so that
Sure.
was something I don't think I could have done long term. But for so many people, it's the right fit, and it's
Yeah.
such a rewarding career, helping people, getting to fly really cool missions,
Yeah.
landing. There's no better feeling than shutting down a highway. It sucks to be the car. God
Yeah.
dang
But
it.
it's
You
cool to
you
be
know
the guy in
you're
the
you see a
helicopter. Yeah.
helicopter landing on a highway, you're going to be stuck for a while.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
to be the actual guy up front that's putting the helicopter on the highway,
It's pretty
it's
cool.
just an incredible experience. So, I love air medical. You guys service most of South Texas, correct? I mean, is
That's
there any other
correct.
service
Yeah.
areas?
If you were to draw a line from Corpus to, you know, San Antonio out to Laredo and down to the valley, that's about what we cover. Um, we have three bases, one in Alice, one up in Beeville, and then we keep an aircraft at Corpus International for
Yep.
direct use of a children's hospital, local Corpus Christi Children's Hospital for patient transfers.
Very cool. Yeah, I only flew into Corpus, I think, twice when I was flying air medical,
Hmm.
down there. Halo had such a big presence, it's usually they were getting the call. And then
Yeah,
if
we're
for
very
whatever
protective of
reason,
our territory. Yeah.
yeah, I would be, I get it. Uh, I think we were only called down there just because availability, you guys
Sure.
were probably out
Yeah.
flying
That's
or
usually what
doing something,
happens. Yeah.
which I was fine with because I was at times in a 206 actually for air evac,
Mm.
407 a lot of the time, but sometimes a 206.
Hmm.
And I was a South Texas Jerdington base, and
Oh yeah.
that
Yeah.
was that was a base that if there was a Corpus call or somewhere between here and Corpus, there in Corpus, you're going to get dispatched. And flying a 206 all the way to Corpus is, you're watching the semi trucks pass you,
Pass you.
on
Yeah.
37. You're like, oh,
Yeah.
I'm never going to get there.
Never
So
gonna get there. Yeah.
well, it's very cool. I think it's, I love the fact, I like when companies have pilots in executive roles. Um,
Yeah.
Specifically, aviation companies. I think it's really important.
Hmm.
We work with a company called Life Flight Network up here in the Pacific Northwest
Yep.
on sales and acquisitions. And, their CEO, who's also on my podcast, Ben Clayton.
Yeah, he's a
Uh,
Marine 53 pilot, if I
yeah,
remember correctly.
exactly. Yeah, he
Yeah.
was a Marine guy as well. Um, I think, for me, having pilots in a position, um, I think is crucial. I think that it adds an extra layer of understanding,
Hmm.
between upper high end management and line pilot.
Yeah.
There's kind of that brotherhood of kind of understanding what
Absolutely.
it's like to
Yeah.
be a pilot. I'm not so sure, and I'm sure it happens, and you could be a very good CEO and not necessarily have a pilot background in this business. But,
Yeah.
I think having someone that's, comes in, say, with a finance degree and is really good at, pro form and whatever, which
Hmm.
I'm sure you're probably pretty, you're obviously a very smart guy.
Well,
But,
working on
you
it.
know,
Yeah.
sometimes, companies pick like the accounting guys, the bean counters, and
Yeah.
that
Doesn't
can be
always work out.
counterproductive,
Doesn't always work out.
So I applaud Halo for bringing on a pilot, and obviously
No, thanks.
they got a good guy.
I hope so. Yeah.
Your resume I was telling my wife, I was reading the resume. I was like, man, look at this. This guy's he's done it all. And
Yeah.
quite the career. And we have to talk about it. I'm
Sure.
obliged to talk about it. But before we get into your experience flying Marine One, which is the presidential helicopter,
Mhm.
we do have to take one more quick break for
Okay.
a sponsor call.
As always, a special thanks to Helicopter for producing this podcast. Specializing in helicopter evaluations, faster sales, and superb service, Helicopter is the go-to agency for clients expecting immediate results. Helicopter's team of helicopter professionals are the best in the business. Using their aviation expertise, a nationwide network, and a proprietary 76-step listing strategy, Helicopter will convert your listing from Mayday to payday. Ready to get started? Text helicopter to 1-855-helicopter. That's helicopter to 1-855-735-5226. And a helicopter pilot agent will reach out. Helicopter. List it, sell it, done.
All right. So something that certainly caught my eye on your resume, and something that Adam brought up to me when he called, is the fact that I think was from 2016 to 2020, you were
Yes.
part of the
Marine.
unit that was flying Marine One.
That's correct. Yeah. Helicopter HMX1 is a helicopter marine test is what it stands for. It used to be an operational test squadron a long time ago. That's its original founding. But since the late 50s, it's been the primary helicopter transportation for the President of the United States. Yep.
That's incredible. And in that capacity, you were in two airframes. It was VH3,
VH3D,
which is like a Sea King.
Yeah, it is. It's 1950s technology, I guess, 60s maybe. And then the H60, a Seahawk, Black Hawk.
Sure.
We called it the White Hawk, just because of the white top on it. But
makes sense.
We flew both of those aircraft. It wasn't uncommon to fly both of them in the same day.
Really, that's cool. I love that.
Yeah.
I did a business course lecture one time. I didn't do it. I was listening, and it was a gentleman that had flown the Sea King in the Navy.
Okay.
And I believe for sub kind
like
of
a sub hunter,
type deal. They hover above the water, stick the
drop
sonar
buoys
in.
and stuff like that. Yeah.
And it was a business lecture, and it was about being an effective member of your team.
Mm-hmm.
And it was the coolest lecture I've ever been a part of, because
Cool.
I was an aviation guy, and this guy was the pilot. And he talks about an experience where they were actually hovering, had an engine fire, ended up into the ocean. And long story short, 45 minutes passes, and they were actually able to fly the helicopter off the water.
Yeah.
And back onto the ship. And the story is, he goes into depth of, how everyone knew their role. That was kind of the moral of the story of,
right.
And tying it into business, how everyone should know their role within a business organization. And he brought that. So, pretty cool story. And I kind of find it wild that that's the helicopter that's being flown for the president still.
Yeah.
Being kind of an older.
It's older. It's obviously very well maintained. I mean, there are 12 of them there. Now that when I left in 2020, the squadron was in the process of switching to the VH-92. I'm not sure where that is at this point. I kind of was out of it. But it's been doing that mission since the 1970s. Obviously not the same aircraft, but that model has been doing it since the 1970s. It's phenomenally capable. It's big. It's quiet in the back. It's comfortable. We took it all over the world. So.
That's crazy. And so you were literally flying the president of the United States.
That's correct. Yes.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's how does one get into that position? What do you have to do within, if we have listeners out there right now that are in the Marine Corps right now, or thinking about doing aviation in the Marine Corps, and maybe have this goal of flying in that unit, what does it take to get there? Because to me, that's like same level as like a Blue Angel, right? It's like, that's like the you got to be like top dog.
It's a competitive application process. So, let's say you get your wings, you go do a tour as a helicopter pilot in a squadron, and you have a good, successful tour. You have a good reputation. You have some qualifications. You have some hours. And then every year, the Marine Corps will send out a message to all helicopter, and we actually there are V-22s there as well. Send out an application message, right? So if anybody's interested in coming to HMX1, submit your application by this date. So you put your application in, and that application goes into a pile of applications at HMX. And we have what's called a pilot selection panel or board. So a handful of pilots from the squadron will sit there and they'll go through every single application, they rack and stack them. And it's, you're compared against everybody else who applies. I mean, flight hours are important, qualification is important. Equally important is your reputation. Are you a good team player? Are you a good addition to the ready room? Can you, from a guy who was there, my perspective, if I'm on a road trip with you for 10 days, can I stand living with you in a hotel room for a week?
Sure.
All of those things are important. Basically the way that panel works is we pick our 12 pilots for that year, and we submit our recommendation to the commanding officer, who's the one who has the final authority. And it is timing matters. I'm hesitant. There used to be a minimum flight hour requirement. There no longer is. Obviously, we want hours. That's important. But one of the unique things about the Marine helicopter community is it's pretty small, right? So if everybody knows everybody, or if they don't know you personally, they know someone who does. So when your application comes to HMX, you may not know everybody in the ready room, but somebody's going to know you, or somebody's going to be at least tangentially acquainted with you and can speak on your behalf. Oh yeah, he's a good guy. Or I don't know. That's kind of a lot of personality is how it works. You can have all the hours on the planet, all the qualifications, but if you're not a good addition to the ready room, probably not going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, that's just like what we talked about with hiring air medical.
Yeah,
right?
Personality goes a long way.
I think if you come into an air medical position and you have the hours, the expectation is that you can fly the helicopter.
Sure.
But do people want to work with you is equally important. And I'm sure that's the same in this capacity. So
Absolutely.
What does the day in the life look like? You said sometimes you fly both
airframes
in the same day.
Yeah.
I mean, are you flying the president like 3 times a week, 5 times a week?
It varies, right? So the way the squadron works is it's a 4-year tour for a helicopter pilot. So your first year is all training, right? So the Marine Corps does not have 60s or H3s anywhere else. So if you go there as a Cobra pilot or a Huey pilot or a 53, you spend your first year learning how to fly the H3 and the H60. When you're done with that training, your second year is your co-pilot year. So when you're a co-pilot, you are on the squadron schedule, basically. The thing we used to say is there's nothing sacred at HMX, Christmases, anniversaries, birthdays, none of that. Like, unless you take a vacation day, don't count on being there. So every time the president goes anywhere, when he leaves DC, the primary method of transport is always Marine One, to fly him from the White House to Andrews. There's a lot of reasons for that. Safety, obviously, and at 5 o'clock in the afternoon in Washington, DC, you don't want to close down the roads for the presidential motorcade, right?
You can't do it.
So that's the primary mode of transportation all the time. So the amount of flying, the amount of times you fly the president is just based on his travel schedule, basically. Like, if you're there during a re-election campaign, you might as well kiss your family goodbye and say, I'll be back in 7 months. If you're there in kind of the off years, then it's a little different. I don't remember how many times I did it as a co-pilot or as an aircraft commander. I have it in my logbook somewhere. So every time you fly it, it's stamped presidential in your logbook. But your day in the life is, it's hard to pin it down. Like, you go to work on Monday and you walk in and, hey, you need to get ready. We're going to go to Cedar Rapids, Iowa. Oh, okay. When are we leaving? In about an hour. So you always had a bag in the car. You always had your lift uniform in the car. The flight schedule would come out every day, and if your name wasn't on it, which was rare, then maybe you had a day off, or we all had work cell phones, and the rule of thumb was do not ever miss a call when that thing comes in. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, it doesn't matter. If somebody calls you on that phone, you answer. So if you were on the schedule, you could be on the schedule for a proficiency flight, or every single day we always had a Marine One crew on the schedule, just in case if something popped up, last minute trip. It wasn't uncommon for the White House military office to call and say, hey, we're going to go to Camp David tomorrow. Oh, okay. So we got to rewrite our entire plan, and now we got to put a crew together to go to Camp David. So those things were the kind of uncertainty was pretty common. The one thing after I'd been there for 2 or 3 years, I would tell guys that checked in after me, or when I was the ops on my last year, I was like, look, you need to be able to thrive on uncertainty because you're never going to know what's going to happen the next day. And take advantage of every opportunity that you get, right? Every time you get invited to the White House Easter egg roll, take your kids and go. If you can do it, take them and go. Those opportunities, you'd regret if you didn't take them. So just, be prepared to thrive on uncertainty. Be prepared to be on the road about 10 to 12 days, maybe 15 days out of every month for 4 years. It's just, you get to see the world, you get to have a great time, but it's a fantastic opportunity. Yeah.
And how much interaction do you actually get with the president? Do you correspond? Do they know who you are?
They don't necessarily know who you are. They would always come up and say, hello, thank you for the flight, have a good day, all that sort of stuff. But, each year there are 5 Marine ones, right? So every year the CO is always, the commanding officer is always one, and he gets to pick his other 4. So you get 1 year as a Marine one. And throughout that year, you'll see him more than the other guys will, but he's in and out of there generally very quickly. But he's always very gracious and polite. He always says hello, thank you for the flight. But our interactions with him are pretty brief. Like when he's on the aircraft, if I need to tell the folks in the back something, like for example, if it's really windy and it's going to be bumpy, I talk to the mill aide, like, hey man, it's going to be real bumpy, so just let everybody know. That kind of stuff. Most of our interactions was with the mill aides. The guy who carries the football. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So it just must be kind of a crazy, it's a wild thing for me to think, you are flying one of the most powerful men.
Yeah. And it doesn't change, right? I would say partially the first time you do it is the strangest, but it never gets routine. I remember very clearly the first presidential flight I did as a co-pilot. It was what we called an out, where you take him from the White House to Andrews. And so we get to the lawn, and we're turning final over the basin with the Washington Monument on your side, and you're looking at the White House. I'm like, this is weird. I'm about to land in the south lawn of the White House. I mean, I'm the co-pilot, so I'm not landing. My responsibilities are pretty minimal. And we get in and you land, and my job as the co-pilot is to talk the pilot onto the pucks, those big round discs. You got to put all 3 wheels in them because you don't want to put holes in the White House lawn. And so once we get on the ground, the pilot that I'm sitting with has done this hundreds of times. I don't know how many, but a lot, right? And he says, hey, there's a little checklist we have to do. The little checklist consists of a couple things. And so once you finish the checklist, and this is my pilot looking at me, once you finish the checklist, take a breath, look out the window, and just appreciate where you are. So we finish that little checklist, and I look, and I go, there's the portico of the White House. It's hard to believe where you're sitting. Even 3.5 years later, when I did it for the last time, it's kind of hard to believe that's where you are. When the president came out on that first one, I was very tempted to smack the pilot and say, hey, look, it's the president. Because I'd never seen it before. It was my first time doing it. Yeah. And I didn't do that, but he's of course done it dozens of times. But yeah, it was, a pretty incredible experience the first time, and every time after that, it never got old.
Yeah, you're truly part of a very small fraternity of humans that can
have done that.
Talk about that experience, which I think is just, to me, it's like one of those experiences that you can almost write a book about. It's just so
there have been a couple
different.
Yeah.
It's just such a different experience and so cool. Your passion for wanting to serve in the military, to want to being a pilot, puts you in a position, and hard work, of course, puts you in a position to be landing a helicopter on the White House. South Lawn.
I think I told you in the beginning, when I went to flight school, I wanted to be an F-18 pilot, and when I got helicopters, I decided that something I wanted to do forever. I want to go to HMX-1. That is now my goal. I want to go be a Marine One pilot. And it took me a while. I had a few opportunities earlier on in my career to apply, but I decided to do other things. And then my last chance was 2015. I'm like, all right, I'm doing it now. If I don't do it now, it's never going to happen. I applied and I got accepted, and it was a pretty phenomenal experience.
Yeah, it'd be incredible. So like when the president travels, say like overseas,
mm-hmm.
Are they stuffing a helicopter in a transport plane and
going put them in the back of a C-17? Yep. Wow. Yeah, if it's the H-3, if I remember correctly, H-3 you had to take the rotor blades off. And the 60, you just had to fold. And you stick them in the back of the C-17 with, it depended on what you were doing, where you were going. If we were going to, I'll use South Korea, for example. When we went, we took two C-17s because the number of aircraft and people we had to take. And you leave Quantico. Quantico's a short runway, so you got to go somewhere else to refuel. Then you go to Alaska, then you go to Hawaii, then you go to South Korea and offload the aircraft. But yeah, they would go all over the world in the back of the C-17. And in the States, sometimes we would do it too, depending on how far. If you could fly it there in 2 legs, we'd fly it. Went to New York a lot. We'd do a cross country up to New York. But if it was too far, you just put it in the cargo plane and fly it.
What's the? I remember. I think it was President Obama was like on a talk show, and he was talking about like his first, when he was becoming the president, essentially, and learning all the craziness of how your life is as the president.
Sure.
And I guess he had to go like 100 yards or a couple hundred yards, and he told his security staff like, "Hey, let's just walk. We'll just walk over there." And they're like, "No, sir, we're gonna take the helicopter." Is that like a true thing, like where you could actually literally just do like a short hop, or was that just?
I never did that. I don't know that that's not
joke?
True. I never did it. I do know that a lot of the decisions that are made based on his movements are not his decisions.
Sure.
The Secret Service. The Secret Service decides a lot, along with HMX-1. Like if we're doing, if we're landing somewhere in a field so he can go give a speech. Before that happens, we have rehearsed it. We've worked with the Secret Service to figure out a whole bunch of the different little details. But it's not like the president says, "Oh, I want to land there and walk." The Secret Service usually, I would imagine that life as the president would be very frustrating because you may be the most powerful man in the world, but the Secret Service won't let you push the door to open the elevator. You know what I mean? Like he doesn't get to make a lot of those decisions. Like,
they don't even drive a car. It's like,
it's
just
anywhere he goes, he's going to be flown or motorcaded. One of the challenging things for us at HMX was really the only aviation challenge you ever had to deal with was weather, right? So we had to make a weather call a certain amount of time before the event. And it's always better, you never wanted to be the guy that made a good weather call and turned out, I was wrong. You can't do it. Because once you make the good weather call, you're going. That was always the challenging part for us. But if he was going, he was on Marine One or in the motorcade or Air Force One. That was it.
That's crazy. And when you're flying with him outside of DC, obviously I know there's the special airspace there in DC. But like, let's say you're in Iowa or something and you're with the president. You essentially have a 30 nautical mile.
Think of
TFR
it like a TFR. Yeah, TFR that follows you around. We would go to New York City a lot. And when you do the rehearsal day in New York City, it's obvious. It's like the Battle of Britain, right? I mean, you fly from JFK to wherever you're going. If you're going up the East River or the Hudson, there's all the tour helicopters, the Wall Street and all that. There's tons of traffic. But on the day with him, you are the only thing flying. It's actually kind of cool.
I think it'd be amazing. Yeah. Where did you land in New York mostly?
Wall Street pad.
Yeah. Wall Street, yeah. I got the opportunity. I was doing a podcast there with a tour operator last year.
Cool.
And I got to experience that whole operation, and that was incredible.
It's pretty neat. Yeah.
It's so cool. What was I going to say? That's a good question. When you're, obviously, we talked about the TFR. I think I had something really amazing to say, but it's slipped my mind, which is unfortunate, but maybe it will come back to me. But I just think it would be an incredible, experience to be around the president. It just seems like,
it was pretty neat. Just to see a small insight into that. Obviously we're, for lack of a better term, we're the help, right? But just a small insight into that world. Like I got to take my wife to the White House Christmas party the last year we were there. And things like that, that were pretty cool. Yeah.
Yeah. Those are experiences that, again, very few people get to have. Well,
get to have.
Travis, we're butting against time here.
No problem.
Thank you so much for coming on and talking about your experience and your journey in helicopters. I feel like a lucky guy doing the podcast because I get to talk to all these really amazing people and kind of get to vicariously live through the experiences of my guests. And every guest has something to offer. And And what you offered today was really neat.
Well,
Just
great.
with your
Thank you.
experience in the
Glad to have done it.
military.
Yeah.
Congratulations on your transition into the civilian world.
Thank you.
And jumping into the CEO position there at Halo. That's equally as awesome, I think, actually, as Flying Marine One.
Yeah. Great organization and great people.
Yeah. So again, if you're listening to the podcast and you haven't heard of Halo before, check them out. Again, a not-for-profit air medical service, specifically kind of servicing the South Texas area. Corpus is an awesome place. If you're into kiteboarding and flying helicopters, then Halo Flight is definitely a place that you should consider because you can live in one of the best kiteboarding spots in the United States, in my opinion.
Definitely,
Travis, again, thank you so much. To our listeners, thank you for supporting the Helicopter Podcast. I say it all the time, but I'll say it again. I just started the podcast just because I thought it might be fun, and it's turned into something so much better. So extremely excited about our collaboration with MHM Publishing and Vertical Helicasts. So please make sure that you're checking out Vertical Helicasts. Right now, it's the Helicopter Podcast, Hangar Z with John Gray, and then The Real Rescue with Jason Quinn, aka Quinny, are kind of the three primary podcasts on that platform. So check all of them out. Please like them, subscribe, and leave reviews. Let us know how we're doing. It kind of helps us. A special thanks to Bell Helicopter as well for sponsoring this podcast and making it possible. As Halo Flight is a big supporter of Bell, I know that you guys can endorse them. And me being a pilot with a lot of Bell experience, I love Bell Helicopter. So thank you to them. Travis, thanks again for joining, and we look forward to getting to talk in the future.